Now, a second critical area where the world is coming together is actually closely related to the first, and that is the challenge of the global environment, specifically climate change. And here, believe me, I have heard the deniers and the naysayers for years. We all have. For a long time, we've been listening to their wild theories and their lame excuses. Well, we're not scientists, so how can we have an opinion about climate change? I've heard that from the United States senators. Well, here you are learning and practicing critical thinking in a university. Are you telling me that the fact that you're not a scientist means you can't say that the earth spins and that clean air is better than dirty air? You don't have to be... You don't have to be a meteorologist to know that 14 of the 15 warmest years ever recorded have taken place in this century, which is only 15 years old. To question the science is an excuse, and there is no time left for excuses. The scientific debate may have had legitimacy once upon a time, but it is over. And let me tell you, there is nothing uniquely liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, American or foreign, about wanting to preserve the health of our planet. And all you have to do is read the scriptures to understand that. We are all affected because we all share the same fragile home. When I first began working on this issue in the 1980s, when I was Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, we were working on acid rain, but later in the 90s in the Senate, we had trouble getting people to buy in. The big industrial nations and the big developing ones who were at odds about who had a responsibility to do what, and when, and how soon. And a lot of people believed that curbing greenhouse gassing emissions was not going to was not going to be good for the economy. It was going to bring their economies to a screeching halt. And finally, you had a lot of people believing simply what they wanted to believe, that climate change was something for future generations to worry about, not their own. But now, because of the mounting science and the realities that we are experiencing on the ground, people realize none of those objections ever really added up, and we have, I think, moved beyond them. If you're 29 years old today, the facts are pretty undeniable, because if you're 29, you have never lived with a month, not one month, that was cooler than the average of any month in the last century. Every year announced is the hottest year. We keep beating the hottest year. And this July was the hottest month in recorded history. And while we can't trace every particular storm or drought to climate change, there is no denying the record number of extreme weather events that we are already witnessing. In southeast Brazil, they're suffering through the worst drought in 80 years. In California, the worst drought in a century, plus wildfires. In Malawi, record floods. In the Arctic, whole villages are in danger. We were just up there with the president recently pointing out what is happening with permafrost thawing and the release of methane and the other challenges. We're seeing villages in danger of sea level rise. In the South Pacific, entire island nations are at risk. Changes in air and water temperatures are affecting the migration patterns of birds, butterflies, and fish. And we are also starting to see desertification and storms affect the migration patterns of people, and we will witness climate refugees, and already are, in our lifetimes. And by the way, we're spending billions. I think we spent more than $100 billion in the last few years just to deal with the damages coming from all of this, rather than to invest in new energy, alternative energy, and ways of mitigating and avoiding the damage in the first place. The good news is that while all of this was happening, something else has been taking place. First, more people are realizing that overdependence on carbon-based fuels is a loser, environmentally and economically. Sure, there are still those who claim you can't afford to transform our energy mix, but the reality is we can't afford not to. We are on the cusp of whole new industries, whole new applications in wind and solar, energy-efficient vehicles, conservation, biofuels. Scientific cooperation and technology sharing agreements in those fields have become a major part of our diplomacy. It's even a big issue in the Middle East, where countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait who built their countries on oil, are making major investments in regional assets other than petroleum. It's called sunshine. So let's be clear. Curbing climate change is not only an environmental imperative, it is a chance to tap well springs of innovation that will enable us to go green and put something green in our wallets at the same time. To do good and to do well at the same time is not a bad political equation. To be honest, when I became Secretary of State, I was told that climate change was not likely to be a promising area for diplomacy. And China was a big part of the reason, because we'd been completely opposed to each other at the last global meeting on climate in Copenhagen. And China was leading the charge of 77 nations to say, your responsibility, not ours. China and the United States are now the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, just shy of 50% of all the gases. But earlier efforts of cooperation were non-starters. So shortly after I was sworn in that February date that the President mentioned, I think I went to China in late March, early April. And I had called them 2 weeks earlier, called my counterpart and said, look, here's what we need to do. We need to come together. We've got to find a way to work on this. And when I come, I have a plan. We're going to lay it down, and let's see if we can do this. I proposed the start of regular formal discussions with China that could break down the barriers and begin to build up our capacity to work together, and laid out every aspect of the issue in a systematic way. Last fall, I invited the Chinese State Counselor to my hometown of Boston to talk about what more our nations could do together in order to tackle the problem. And then in January, after we'd laid the groundwork, President Obama went to Beijing for further talks. The result was a spectacle that few expected. The American and Chinese presidents standing side by side in the Great Hall in Beijing to announce their agreement to announce their nation's respective greenhouse gas emissions targets for the years to come. The substance mattered. It was a dramatic moment of transformation, where China and the United States joined together, and it took away the excuse from less developed countries. And the symbolic breakthrough of this coordination was bigger than many of us maybe even anticipated. Since then, every major economy in the world and 150 nations have come forward with their own set of targets, or in the case of India, unveiled a plan to make massive new investments in alternative energy. In just 2 months, representatives from around the world will gather in Paris to approve what I hope will be by far the most ambitious agreement on global climate ever reached. And hopefully it will send a signal to the marketplace. Now, there's still many issues to be resolved, but the momentum is building. And skeptics argue that even a strong agreement is likely to fall short of what is needed. The answer is yes, it is going to fall short of what is needed. This is going to prove to be the best that we can achieve at this moment, but it's going to elicit extraordinary buy-in at the grassroots level around the world. Mayors, we just had an event in Washington with former Mayor Mike Bloomberg, and bringing mayors from around the world together to show what can happen at grassroots levels to move where federal governments are unwilling to move. And if what we agree to in Paris is considered the least that we must do instead of the most that we can do, in other words, if we treat it like a floor and not a ceiling, then we can continue right on doing more as the technology begins to lower the prices and as businesses begin to make investments that are different in how they power their business and how people run their communities, because they see that is the future. In recent months, we have made big inroads in mobilizing urban and provincial governments worldwide to set their own targets. And the private sector and civil society are treating this challenge as one that we have to beat. I think anything less would be a felony against the future. There is a generational responsibility here.